Imagine boarding a plane for a routine flight, smiling at the crew, buckling your seatbelt, and watching the city lights vanish beneath you. But what if that plane never lands? This is not just a ghost story. It's an unsolved mystery that has haunted investigators for decades. A flight that took off with over 200 souls on board, only to vanish into thin air. No wreckage, no bodies, no answers. Just one chilling black box recording with voices that should not have been there. Tonight, we relive the final moments of the plane that the world now calls the last transmission. The evening was calm on June 7, 1992, as Flight 191 prepared for departure from Toronto Pearson International Airport. A clear summer night, perfect flying conditions. The aircraft, a Boeing 757, was bound for Denver, a route flown countless times before. On board were two hulls of passengers, families, business travelers, college students heading home for summer break, ordinary people, taking what should have been an ordinary flight. Captain Michael Harrington, a veteran pilot with over 20 years of experience, signed off on his checklist. Beside him sat First Officer Daniel Reeves, younger, sharp, confident. The crew joked with attendants, the kind of small talk that fills the silence before a long flight. At 9:17 p.m., Flight 191 rolled onto the runway. The engines roared. The plane lifted into the night sky, climbing smoothly into the darkness. But at 9:41 p.m., the first sign of trouble came. Air traffic control logged a faint message from Flight 991. Control, we are seeing lights out here. Not on radar. Holding pattern until further. And then silence. Controllers attempted contact. No reply. Radar showed the plane circling, holding altitude. But the radio remained dead. Minutes passed. Then another transmission, this time different. A woman's voice, not the captain, not the first officer. A trembling, broken whisper. They're here. Static swallowed the rest. When investigators checked the passenger manifest later, they confirmed there was no female crew member in the cockpit, no woman authorized to be on the flight deck. By 10:04 p.m., Flight 191 disappeared from radar completely. No mayday call, no emergency beacon. Just gone. The last confirmed sighting of the plane came from a fisherman on Lake Superior's north shore. He swore he saw a ghostly set of lights sweeping across the clouds before vanishing into nothing. And the nightmare of Flight 191 had only just begun. For the first 24 hours after Flight 191 disappeared, investigators treated it as a standard search and rescue mission. Planes had vanished before: weather, mechanical failure, pilot error. There was always an explanation, always something to find. But this was different. The last known position placed the Boeing over northern Lake Superior, a vast, cold stretch of water known as the graveyard of the Great Lakes. Search teams mobilized, Coast Guard copters, dozens of private fishing vessels, and yet not a single scrap of debris floated to the surface. Not a single oil slick, nothing. As investigators dug deeper into the radio logs, unease began to grow. The first transmission, Captain Harrington's report of lights not on radar, was troubling enough. But it was the second message that sent shivers through every official listening to the tapes. The voice of the unknown woman. The recording was faint, smothered in static, but with enhanced playback. The words were clear. They're here. Then silence. No scream, no cockpit alarms, just those two words. The FAA confirmed the voice did not match any flight crew member. And when cross-checked against the passenger manifest, no match there either. It was as if someone else had been on board. Meanwhile, family members gathered in waiting rooms across Toronto and Denver. They were told to stay calm, that the plane might have ditched on water, that survivors could be awaiting rescue. But by the third day, hope began to wither. No wreckage, no life rafts, no emergency pings, only radar logs that showed something even stranger. After the last transmission, Flight 191 hadn't plunged suddenly from the sky. Instead, it kept flying. For nearly 45 minutes, radar showed the aircraft circling over the lake. Steady altitude, controlled speed, almost as if it was waiting. And then, at 10:04 p.m., it simply vanished. Controllers swore the plane did not descend, it did not break apart. It just blinked out, like a light switched off in the sky. To this day, no one has explained how a fully fueled Boeing 757, weighing over 200,000 pounds, carrying more than 200 souls, could vanish without a trace. But the truth, the terrifying truth, was yet to surface, because weeks later searchers recovered the black box, and what it contained would haunt them forever. The official search for Flight 191 lasted 12 weeks. 12 long, desperate weeks combing every inch of Lake Superior and its rocky shores. Divers plunged into black. Sonar scans painted endless maps of the lakebed. Helicopters traced every possible flight path. But the result was always the same: nothing. No fuselage, not even a floating seat cushion. Families demanded answers. News reporters circled like vultures, and the government issued press conferences filled with carefully chosen words. Unprecedented situation, unexplained anomaly, investigation ongoing. But behind closed doors panic was brewing, because in week 7, something was recovered. At the southern edge of the search grid, a Coast Guard vessel picked up a strange sonar return, an object partially buried in silt, nearly 600 feet below the surface. Divers were dispatched. When they returned pale and shaken, they carried with them a single artifact, not wreckage, not a body. The cockpit voice recorder, the black box of Flight 191. It was flown immediately to Ottawa for analysis, and when investigators pressed play, expecting to hear the chaos of a doomed cockpit, they instead heard something far worse. The recording began normally. Checklists, chatter, the faint hum of the engines. Then, at 9:41 p.m., Captain Harrington's voice, "Control, we're seeing lights out here. Not on radar. Holding pattern until further." The audio clipped. Static surged. Then came the woman's voice. Soft cracking. "They're here." At this point, investigators expected alarms, shouts, confusion. But instead, the next 30 minutes were filled with whispers. Not from the captain. Not from the first officer. Not from anyone listed as crew or passenger. Dozens of unfamiliar voices, layered over each other. Men, women, children, some laughing, some crying, some chanting words in languages that no one could identify. Investigators described it as a chorus of the dead. The final 60 seconds of tape were perhaps the most chilling. The cockpit door alarm clicked. The sound of footsteps echoed slow and heavy. And then the captain's trembling voice. "Who's in here? Identify yourself." A sharp metallic bang. The sound of oxygen masks dropping. And then silence. The last words ever recorded aboard Flight 191 were a whisper, spoken not by the crew but by something else. Close to the microphone. Breathing, almost smiling as it said, "One never left." The tape ended. The black box was locked away in government archives. Officials denied its contents, calling them classified. But among the handful of technicians who heard it, none ever slept the same again. And the strangest part, the box had been recovered hundreds of miles off course from the plane's last radar position, in waters too shallow for a 200-ton jet to have crashed without leaving wreckage. It was as if the recorder had simply been placed there, a breadcrumb, left behind on purpose. The black box of Flight 191 was supposed to be the final answer. Instead, it became the beginning of a nightmare. Only 6 men and women were allowed inside the soundproof analysis room when the tape was played in full, each one a veteran investigator, each one hardened by years of disaster recovery. But when the playback ended, not one of them spoke. They sat frozen, some staring at the wall, others clutching the arms of their chairs as if still falling through the sky. One technician, Michael Travers, vomited into a trash bin and refused to go back in. Another, Dr. Ellen Carr, whispered only one thing before leaving the room. It wasn't human. The official transcript released to the public was heavily edited. According to the government, the last words were nothing more than, "Engine failure, mayday, mayday." But inside the hidden files, the true transcript painted a different story: multiple unknown voices aboard the aircraft, words in languages no linguist could identify. A chorus that grew louder and louder as the flight circled Lake Superior, and that final, skin-crawling whisper, "One never left." But here's the part almost no one knows. The technicians began to report strange phenomena after hearing the tape. Michael Travers, the one who vomited, claimed he could still hear voices in his apartment at night, soft murmurs coming through the air vents. A week later, he was found drowned in his own bathtub. Dr. Carr, the linguist, began scribbling notes in her journals, pages upon pages of symbols she claimed matched what she heard on the tape. Her handwriting grew frantic, unreadable. She vanished 3 months later during a walk near the lake. Only her notebook was found damp and smelling of jet fuel. And as for the lead investigator, Director Raymond Holt, he refused to discuss the case at all. But during a private dinner with a colleague, he finally broke his silence. He leaned in, pale, trembling, and said, "That wasn't a recording of the crash. That was a recording of something else already on board." After that night, Holt resigned, retired to a cabin, and never spoke publicly again. Behind the scenes, whispers began to circulate that Flight 191 wasn't the first plane to vanish over the Great Lakes. That somewhere, hidden deep beneath the waves, there was something old waiting, and whatever had been captured on that tape, it wasn't finished. Because soon, strange reports started coming from commercial pilots still flying that corridor. Faint voices breaking into their headsets, ghostly radar blips that followed for miles then vanished. And in one chilling case, a co-pilot swore he saw the outline of another plane, dark, silent, flying parallel only to dissolve into mist. Flight 191 was gone, but its shadow remained. Lake Superior is known for its storms, for its sudden fog, for ships that vanish beneath its surface. But after Flight 191, a new kind of fear spread among those who dared to cross it. Not storms, not waves, but voices. The first reports came from fishermen, men who had sailed those waters their entire lives. One night in 1982, a crew anchored near Isle Royale swore they heard a distress call over their shortwave radio. A woman's voice broken by static. "This is Flight 991, can anyone hear us?" The fishermen responded panicked, trying to guide the signal. But the voice didn't answer. It only repeated the same line again and again. "This is Flight 991, can anyone hear us?" The Coast Guard logged the incident, but no explanation was given. Years later, commercial pilots began filing anonymous reports. One claimed that, while flying at 10,000 feet, his radar picked up a shadowing aircraft. When he radioed the tower for confirmation, the reply was chilling. "You're alone in that airspace." Another pilot swore he saw passengers staring at him from the windows of a dark, silent jet gliding alongside. Faces pale, motionless. The craft dissolved into clouds within seconds. A third pilot, visibly shaken, said a chorus of voices suddenly erupted in his headset mid-flight. He recognized none of them, except one. The voice of his late father, who had died a year earlier, whispering, "Don't look down." By the 1990s, Flight 191 had become an open secret among Great Lakes aviators. They called it the Phantom Route, a stretch of sky where radios glitched, compasses spun, and voices blooded from nowhere. Some captains refused to fly it altogether. Others carried small charms, prayers, or even recordings of church bells to ward off whatever lurked in those clouds. And yet the encounters continued. The most chilling account came from a rescue chopper crew in 2004. They were searching for a missing kayaker when they spotted something massive on the water's surface, a long metallic fuselage. Windows shattered, wings bent. They circled, radioing command. But as they descended, the wreck began to sink. The pilot swore he saw figures inside, passengers strapped in their seats, faces pressed against the glass. But by the time they reached the surface, nothing remained. Not a bubble, not a ripple. Just the endless black waters of Lake Superior. To this day, fishermen still claim that on quiet nights, when the lake is still, they can hear jet engines roaring far above. But when they look up, the sky is empty. And if you tune your radio just right, between static and silence, you might still hear it. "This is Flight 91, can anyone hear us?" A call from a plane that should no longer exist. A call that has never stopped. For decades, families of Flight 191's passengers lived in grief. No bodies recovered, no closure, just names carved into stone. But then strange things began happening. In 1985, 4 years after the crash, a woman named Marjorie Ellis received a phone call late at night. She picked up, half asleep, only to hear a voice she hadn't heard since the crash. It was her husband Daniel, calm, breathing, speaking through static. "Marjorie, I'm almost home." Before she could reply, the line went dead. Phone records showed no incoming call, no trace. Marjorie wasn't alone. Over the years, more families came forward with similar stories. A teenage son claimed his missing father left a voicemail, whispering, "Stay away from the water." A mother swore she saw her daughter's reflection in the mirror. older, changed, staring back at her before vanishing. One man even produced a photograph he claimed arrived in the mail. A picture of his brother, seated inside a plane cabin, the number 191 faintly visible on the seatback. The postmark, no origin. In 1993, a retired phone operator broke silence about something her company had buried. She revealed that for nearly a decade after the disappearance, Flight 191's passengers' numbers would sometimes light up the switchboards, as if calls were trying to connect. But when operators answered, they heard nothing but the sound of wind, and once a faint chorus of voices praying. Then came the most terrifying incident of all. In 2008, on the 27th anniversary of the crash, several families gathered near Lake Superior for a memorial. As candles flickered and names were read aloud, one phone after another began to ring. Different families, different carriers, all at once. The calls displayed the names of their missing loved ones. When answered, every line carried the same whispering message. One never landed. The FBI investigated but closed the case within weeks. The official explanation: cell tower spoofing. But the families knew better, because many of the numbers that called had been disconnected since 1981. The haunting truth grew clearer. The passengers of Flight 191 hadn't simply perished. Something had taken them. Something still holding them in a place between sky and water. And through brief cracks, through phones, mirrors, and dreams, they were still reaching out. Not for help, not for rescue, but for something else. For decades, Flight 191 has been more than a missing aircraft. It has become a shadow. A legend whispered in hangars, lighthouses, and fishing boats across the Great Lakes. But legends don't make people disappear. And yet they still do. In 2015, a small charter plane vanished en route from Thunder Bay to Duluth. Search teams found no wreckage, no debris. But the family of one passenger swore they received a text message hours after the disappearance. It read, "Boarded 191. Don't wait for me." The number traced back to the passenger's own phone, which has never been recovered. A year later, a storm stranded two hikers near the lake's northern shore. Cold, lost, and desperate, they claimed they saw a glowing fuselage descending through the fog. It landed silently on the water, lights burning bright. Drawn to it, the hikers approached the shore, only to realize the windows were filled with faces. Not terrified, not skeletal, just waiting, eyes locked on the land as though begging for someone to join them. Before the hikers could take another step, the plane lifted off. No engines, no sound, just rising into the storm until it vanished. And now the most chilling revelation. Investigators, digging through radar logs from the 1980s, discovered anomalies, blips that appeared every few years, at the same altitude, on the same route. The blips always followed the same course across the Great Lakes, before fading into nothing. The last recorded anomaly. 2 years ago, air traffic controllers swore they heard a transmission. A man's voice clear as day. "This is Flight 191, requesting permission to land." The voice was traced. It matched Captain Robert Hensley, the pilot of Flight 191, a man missing for over 40 years, which leaves one final horrifying possibility. Flight 191 never crashed. It never landed. It is still up there, circling, trapped in a loop between sky and water. Its passengers aging, or perhaps not aging at all. Its crew still calling out, desperate for a runway that doesn't exist. And every so often it opens its doors. That's when hikers vanish, boats go missing, planes disappear, because the passenger list of Flight 91 is still growing. So next time you fly over Lake Superior, and your radio crackles with static, and you hear a voice whisper, "This is Flight 191, can anyone hear us?" Don't answer, because once you do, you might never land again.